The hospital gown was still on when my husband called to ask what I was making for dinner. I want you to sit with that for a second. I had just come out of a 4-hour surgery to remove a cyst the size of a golf ball from my left ovary. The anesthesia hadn't fully worn off. My mouth tasted like copper and plastic. I couldn't feel my legs properly, and my phone buzzed on the bedside tray, his name lighting up the screen, and I thought, finally, he's calling to check on me. "Hey," he said. "So what's the plan for tonight?" I was thinking that chicken thing you do with the rosemary. I didn't say anything for a moment. The nurse across the room glanced up from her clipboard. "I'm still at the hospital," I said. "Yeah, I know, but you said it was outpatient. Figured you'd be home by 4. It was 3:47 p.m. I had gone into surgery alone that morning. He had a thing at work, a quarterly review, he said, that he absolutely could not reschedule. My best friend had offered to come, but I told her not to, because I genuinely believed my husband would show up. I sat in that pre-op waiting room in a paper gown with a plastic bracelet around my wrist, watching other women get wheeled in by their husbands, their mothers, their sisters, and I kept thinking he'd walk through those doors. He never did. I need to go back a little bit because this didn't start with the surgery. It started, or maybe it finally became impossible to ignore, about 6 months before, when my mother-in-law moved into the guest room of our house. My husband and I had been married for 3 years. We lived in a 2-bedroom house in a quiet suburb of Columbus, Ohio. He worked in logistics for a distribution company. I worked as a paralegal at a mid-sized firm downtown. We split the bills roughly down the middle. We had a dog named Pepper and a vegetable garden neither of us watered enough, and what I thought, for a long time, was a reasonably good marriage. His mother, I'll just call her what she is, my mother-in-law, had what she described as a falling out with her boyfriend of 12 years and needed a place to stay temporarily. Temporarily, my husband said. 2 weeks, maybe 3. That was 8 months before the surgery. In those 8 months, my mother-in-law had rearranged my kitchen twice, told me my cooking was too salty, at least once a week, informed me that the way I loaded the dishwasher was wrong, suggested that I was probably the reason we didn't have children yet, and made it very clear in 100 small, quiet ways that she did not think I was good enough for her son. My husband thought she was just being herself. He thought I was too sensitive. He said it a lot. "You're too sensitive, Lena," in the same tone you'd use to explain something obvious to someone slow. Lena. That's me. I'm 31 years old. I've been a paralegal for 6 years. I can draft a motion in my sleep and spot a contract clause that'll blow up in court 3 years from now, but apparently I am too sensitive to handle my mother-in-law telling me I fold towels wrong. The surgery had been scheduled for weeks. It wasn't an emergency, but it wasn't optional either. The cyst was growing. My OB/GYN referred me to a specialist. The specialist said, "Let's take it out before it causes a problem," and we scheduled it for a Tuesday morning in March. I told my husband the date the same day I scheduled it. I reminded him 2 weeks out. I reminded him again the Sunday before. Each time he nodded and said, "Yeah, of course," the way he said most things, half present, one eye on his phone. Tuesday morning I drove myself to the hospital. I checked in. I answered all the intake questions. I changed into the gown. I lay on the gurney in the pre-op bay and I watched the clock and I waited. And when they finally wheeled me in and the anesthesiologist told me to count back from 10, I only made it to 7. I woke up in recovery to the sound of someone else's husband saying, "You did so great, baby. I'm right here." I turned my face toward the window and I did not cry. I decided then and there that I was done waiting for a man who was never going to show up. By the time a nurse helped me into a wheelchair and rolled me out to the pickup area, where I had arranged after the surgery for a car service because I could not drive myself, I had already decided what I was going to do. I just needed to get home first. The car service driver was a quiet man who didn't make conversation, which I was grateful for. I sat in the back seat with a pillow pressed against my abdomen and watched Ohio pass by the window. The flat gray sky, the fast food signs, the church marquees with their little Bible quotes, and I thought about what my life had become and what I was going to do about it. My mother-in-law's car was in the driveway when I got home. My husband's was not. I let myself in through the side door. The one off the garage, the one I used every single day coming home from work, the one where Pepper always waited because she could hear the specific sound of my key in that particular lock. She was there, tail going, and I crouched down, slowly, carefully, one hand on the doorframe, and let her sniff my hand and thump against my legs. My mother-in-law appeared in the kitchen doorway in her house slippers and a fleece robe. She looked at me the way she always looked at me, like I was a minor inconvenience that had not yet been resolved. "You're back," she said. "I live here," I said. I went upstairs. I had made a plan on the car ride home, and the first step of the plan was to call my friend Denise. Denise had been my closest friend since college. She was also, as of 2 years ago, a licensed attorney in the state of Ohio specializing in family law. I had not asked her for legal advice before because I had not let myself fully accept, until that Tuesday afternoon, lying in a hospital recovery room, that I was going to need it. She picked up on the second ring. "Tell me you're not calling me from the hospital," she said. "I'm home. I just need to ask you something." She went quiet in the way she goes quiet when she's listening hard. I asked her what I needed to ask. She gave me a very specific answer. And then she said, "Are you sure about this?" I told her I'd been sure for a while. I just hadn't said it out loud. "Okay," she said, "come to my office Thursday. Bring everything you have. Bank statements, the mortgage documents, your pay stubs, anything in both your names." I already knew where everything was. I had always been the one who managed the paperwork in our house. My husband believed that was because I was good at that stuff. What it actually meant was that I had access to every financial document we owned, and he had, over 3 years, essentially handed me the administrative control of our entire shared life, without ever thinking about what that meant. People underestimate paralegals. We make the same mistake. He made the same mistake of thinking that the person who keeps the files is just a secretary, but the person who keeps the files knows everything. That evening, my husband came home at 6:30. I was sitting on the couch with a heating pad on my stomach and a cup of tea going cold on the coffee table. Pepper was at my feet. The house smelled like the soup my mother-in-law had made. She was a decent cook, I'll give her that. And everything looked perfectly normal. He sat down in the armchair across from me and picked up the remote. "How'd it go?" he said. "Fine," I said. "Good, good." He found a game. His mother brought him a bowl of soup. She set it on the side table next to him without looking at me. He said, "Thanks, Mom," and settled back into the chair, and I sat there with my heating pad, and I thought, this is the last ordinary evening of my life as I have known it. Tomorrow it starts to change. I want to be clear about something. I am not a dramatic person. I have never been someone who throws dishes or screams or makes scenes. When I am hurt, I go quiet. When I am angry, I get organized. The 2 worst things that have happened to me in my adult life. The first being my father's death 4 years ago, the second being this. I handled both of them the same way. I made a list. I worked through the list. I did not fall apart. The next 2 weeks, I moved quietly through my own house like I always had. I cooked, I cleaned, I went to work, I came home. I took Pepper for her walks. I smiled at my mother-in-law when she made her little comments. I said, "You're probably right," the way I had learned to say it to avoid conflict. And I did not let one single thing in my face or my body tell them anything was different. At work, during my lunch breaks, I was on the phone with Denise. In the evenings, when my husband thought I was answering work emails in the study, I was organizing financial documents and scanning them to a cloud account he had no access to. I had opened that account 3 months earlier, when I had first started to understand where things were going. A separate email address, a separate password, linked to nothing he could find. The mortgage on our house was in both our names, but the down payment had come entirely from money my father left me when he died. I had the records. I had the paper trail. Denise told me what that meant, legally. I also had 3 years of bank statements that told a very specific story about the way money moved in our household. I had brought in, on average, 42% of our combined income during our marriage. I had paid, on average, 61% of our shared household expenses. I had that in a spreadsheet. Denise's paralegal printed it out in color. I am not going to pretend I wasn't scared. Every night I lay in the dark in our bedroom. He had taken to staying up late watching television, so I usually fell asleep alone, and I cataloged every fear I had. The house, Pepper, starting over at 31, what people at church would say, what his family would say, what he would say when I finally said it out loud. What kept me from backing down was remembering the hospital, the pre-op bay, the other women and their husbands, and then waking up, and the first voice I heard being a stranger's. On a Friday evening, 2 weeks after the surgery, my mother-in-law went to her book club. She went every other Friday. She would be gone for at least 3 hours. My husband was in the kitchen making himself a sandwich. I stood in the doorway. "Can we talk?" I said. He put the knife down. He turned around. Something in my voice, maybe something in the way I was standing. "What's wrong?" "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me without interrupting." He pulled out a bar stool and sat down. He had the sense, at least, to understand that this was not a small conversation. He folded his hands on the counter and he looked at me. For one moment, he looked more present than he had in probably a year. I told him I was filing for divorce. I told him calmly, clearly, without crying, without raising my voice. I told him I had been to see an attorney. I told him I had documentation of my financial contributions to the household, going back to our first month of marriage. I told him about the down payment my father had left me and what that meant in terms of the house. I told him I had already arranged to have the paperwork filed on Monday morning. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "This is because of my mother." And I said, "It's because of you." He stared at me. I don't think he had ever heard me say anything like that in 3 years of marriage. I had always been the one to soften things, to apologize first, to say I know you didn't mean it, and I'm probably overreacting. I was not doing that now. "You didn't even come to the hospital," I said. "It was outpatient." "You didn't come to the hospital," I said. "It was outpatient." "You didn't come. I had surgery and you didn't come. And when I got home, the first thing you said to me was what I was making for dinner." He opened his mouth. He closed it again. "I'm not angry," I said. And I meant it. "I'm done." "That's different." He called his mother. I don't know what he said because I had gone upstairs and closed the bedroom door. Pepper came up with me. I sat on the floor with my back against the bed and my dog's head in my lap, and I listened to the muffled sound of him pacing the kitchen below me. And I breathed, and I was all right. His mother was home within 45 minutes. I heard the garage door, the side door, the rapid conversation starting up before she'd even taken her coat off. I stayed upstairs. She knocked on the bedroom door. "Come out and talk about this like an adult," she said. I didn't answer. "You are destroying this family," she said. "Over what? Over a doctor's appointment?" I opened the door. "I want to tell you something about that moment, because it's the moment I think about most. I had been afraid of my mother-in-law for 2 years. Not physically. She had never threatened me. But in the way you're afraid of someone who has slow, steady power over the person you love. She had chipped away my confidence for 8 months in my own house, and I had let her because I was trying to keep the peace, trying to be a good wife, trying to be patient. Standing in that doorway, I realized I was not afraid of her anymore. I don't know exactly when it had happened. Somewhere in those 2 weeks of making plans and preparing documentation, I had stopped being afraid of what she could do and started understanding what I was actually dealing with. She was a woman who needed her son to stay small so she could stay central. That was her situation. It had nothing to do with me. I looked at her and I said, very quietly, "I need you to start making arrangements to leave this house. You have 30 days, and that is me being generous." Her face went through several things very quickly. "This is my son's house. Half of it is mine," I said. "And I have the paperwork to prove which half." I closed the door. Monday morning, Denise filed the papers. Because I had documentation of the full down payment coming from my inheritance, and because I had 3 years of financial records showing my contributions, the initial assessment was favorable. The house would most likely come to me, or to a negotiated buyout with favorable terms. Denise was calm about it, matter of fact. She had seen far worse, she said. My husband called me twice while I was at work that Monday. I let both calls go to voicemail. I listened to the first one, his voice tight, trying to sound reasonable, and deleted the second without listening. That evening, I drove home not knowing what I would walk into. I sat in my car in the parking lot of the Kroger 2 blocks from my house for almost 15 minutes. Pepper needed to be fed. I had to go home eventually. The house was quiet when I came in. His car was in the driveway, but the lights were off downstairs. I fed Pepper. I made myself a bowl of cereal because I didn't have the energy for anything else, and I sat at my own kitchen table and I ate it and I was all right. He came downstairs after a while and stood in the doorway, the same place I had stood 2 nights before. "Can we talk?" he said. I looked up. "I talked to a guy at work," he said. "His wife left him 2 years ago," he said. He stopped. He rubbed the back of his neck. He said I probably should have seen this coming. I waited. "I didn't come to the hospital," he said. "I don't have an excuse. I keep trying to think of one and I don't have one." That was the most honest thing he had said to me in a long time. Maybe in years. "I know," I said. "Is there any way—" "No," I said. Not unkindly, just clearly. He nodded slowly. He went back upstairs. His mother was gone by the end of the month. She did not say goodbye to me. She took her things in 2 carloads on a Saturday while I was at the farmer's market with Denise. And when I came home, the guest room was empty and there was no note. The divorce took 7 months. It was not dramatic. My husband did not fight the financial terms as hard as I expected. I think the spreadsheet Denise sent to his attorney took some of the wind out of that particular sale. We divided what we had divided, we signed what we signed, and it was done. I kept the house. I kept Pepper. I kept the vegetable garden, which I started actually watering properly that spring, and which gave me more zucchini than one person could reasonably consume. I also kept my job, and 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I got a promotion. Associate paralegal to senior. My supervising attorney took me to lunch to tell me, and said she had been watching my work for 2 years, and she was glad things in my personal life had sorted themselves out. I laughed. I didn't explain. There is one more thing. About 4 months after the divorce was final, I ran into my former mother-in-law at the grocery store. The Kroger, in fact. The same Kroger parking lot where I had sat in my car working up the nerve to go home. She was in the produce section. I saw her before she saw me. I could have turned down a different aisle. I thought about it for maybe 2 seconds. I kept walking. I got what I needed from the bin. I straightened up, and she saw me. Her expression did the thing it had always done, starting with something cold and defensive and sliding into something harder to name. I smiled at her. Not a fake smile, not a performance. "Hi," I said. "Hope you're doing well." And I walked away and I did not look back. And in the parking lot, the April sun was out and Pepper was waiting in the car, and I had a house to go home to that was mine. I still think about that pre-op waiting room sometimes. The way I kept watching the door. The way I kept telling myself he was just running late. That any minute I'd hear his voice at the check-in desk asking which bay I was in. I held on to that story all the way up until they put the mask over my face and told me to count backward. I let it go somewhere around 8. What I've come to understand, not right away, but slowly, the way you understand things that are too close to see clearly at first, is that what happened to me followed a logic I didn't want to acknowledge for a long time. The way he treated me wasn't random, it was consistent. It was a pattern I had been quietly excusing for years because I had convinced myself that patience was the same thing as love, and that keeping the peace was the same thing as keeping a marriage. Those are not the same things. I know that now. There's something I want to say about the choices I made in those 2 weeks after the surgery, because I think people sometimes look at a story like mine and see a woman who got lucky, who happened to have a lawyer for a friend, who happened to have a quote good records. But it wasn't luck, not really. Denise was my friend because I had shown up for her for 15 years. The records existed because I had always taken responsibility seriously, even when no one was watching or thanking me for it. The financial paper trail existed because I had been the person in my marriage who paid attention and followed through. You don't get to cash in on 15 years of showing up only when things fall apart, but you do get to rely on the foundation you quietly built. That's the part I didn't expect to feel proud of, not the outcome, the preparation. The fact that when I needed to act, I could. I had the information. I had the discipline. I had the clarity to move carefully instead of reactively. to stay composed in my own house for 2 weeks while I got everything in order. That composure didn't come from nowhere. It came from every time I had chosen to handle something properly instead of sloppily, every time I had told the truth to myself even when it was inconvenient. My mother-in-law said I was destroying the family. What she meant was that I was refusing to keep absorbing the cost of something I hadn't agreed to pay for. There's a difference. I didn't blow anything up. I just stopped holding the pieces together with my bare hands and pretending the structure was sound. I think about Lena, about myself at 31, sitting on that hospital gurney alone, still hoping. And I want to tell her what I know now. That the hardest thing is not leaving. The hardest thing is being honest with yourself early enough that you still have choices. That doing right by yourself is not selfishness. That being smart about your own life is not coldness. That getting back up, quietly, methodically, without drama or performance, is one of the most courageous things a person can do. The April sun was out when I walked to my car that day at Kroger. I had a house, a dog, a promotion, and a life that was entirely, finally mine. That didn't happen to me. I built it.